Headroom tells us by what amount the actual nominal level that we work at is smaller than the maximum of the scale. So if I play this song, you can see the maximum level right there. So Headroom tells us what is the amount that we have left up to our actual maximum, up to the peak where it will distort, where it will clip. So you can think of headroom as this, safety zone where we have more space for the transients of the sounds to, push through so that they wouldn't clip, they wouldn't reach this digital scale's maximum of 0. Now, this is also present in analog systems where, the amount of power that can go through a system is, determined by how big the actual wire is, how thick the wire is, or by the capability of the system to actually carry out certain amounts of voltage. So right here, you can think of headroom as how much free space we have up until our actual maximum of 0. And as you can see, since the start of this song, I never made any of these signals as loud, so that once they're all mixed down into our master channel, our master track, it never exceeds 0. So as you can see, by default, me mixing this song as I was working on it, I actually don't have that problem. So all of these, when added up together, all of these tracks, they never exceed 0 on the master track. So that's one use for the headroom, actually leaving enough headroom so that our master track never exceeds 0, so that all of these tracks, when summed up into one, don't produce a signal loud enough to exceed the digital 0, or the maximum of the digital dBFS, decibel full scale. So you can look at it that way, that you never want all your tracks to go into your master and clip. Or you can look at it this way. So if I place any of the effects on any of these tracks right there, I do not want that signal to go into my processor very hot. So let's say something as simple as this EQ. Let's say an EQ, just like this one. And I'm going to solo these drums. And now when I play them, when I play those drums, all of them, so you can see the maximum I'm reaching, minus 6.1. So that's my input and my output level, since I'm not changing anything right there. Yeah? But if I took, let's say, a different kind of an effect, like, let's say, a tape machine, like this one. Now, let's say a tape machine is designed to handle signals of a certain level. So it's calibrated to handle signals of a certain level. So if I go into this tape machine too hard, it will be clipping on the input. So let's try to do that. I'm going to leave both of these at nominal 0. So like that. Yep. So input and output at 0. And I'm going to boost these tracks, all of them, everything that's in the drums, to be louder, so that the input into this tape is quite loud. So you see, I do get distortion because overdriving that makes it clip. Of course, I do have controls right here on this tape machine to lower the input levels, but you do have plugins that are not designed that way. So you do have plugins that expect a certain level of a signal on their input. Let's say most of those are something like just the one you saw, so emulations of analog gear. And in those, you can see that, once you overdrive the input, let's say like this one, you can see that the input will be clipping. See, it's showing us the clip. So if I switch to input monitoring, so that this VU meter shows me the input, you see, even if I reset that, it still shows me that it's clipping. And it shows me the clip on the output. So I can turn the gain down. Okay, that's good. Now I'm not clipping anymore. But still, if, let's say, out of this plugin, that is just before that compressor, if I turn the output out, as you can see between these two, just look at that, I'm exceeding the maximum of 0 dBFS. Now, Ableton having an internal 32-bit or 64-bit, point float precision has much more resolution for digital audio than the actual files I'm working with. So even if I exceed 0 at any of these tracks right there, it won't make any clipping on the group track or anywhere else. It will on the master, but nowhere before that, because I do have some leeway. So the digital precision in which all of these audio signals are handled is double of what we have, or even more than double. So you shouldn't be afraid of that. But if I'm feeding from one processor into another a really loud signal that the next one cannot really handle, at that point I'm creating a problem for myself. And this can be overwhelming because you might just throw on some effects onto the track and process them more and more and process with EQs, compressor, add more and more, and then in the end you don't really know what you have in between them. So it's really important that you have that gain staging mindset. Once you put everything on, you try to always have the nominal level in between those. So you always try to have a normal level between those that does not exceed 0. And the reason for that is actually not feeding the next effect in line with a really hot signal, with a really loud signal that it cannot handle. Because some of those, plugins being made by different manufacturers are programmed to, handle a signal of a certain level, and anything beyond that could be clipped. You don't know what's in the programming of that plugin. So to be on the safe side, you always do that. And people used to do that also when they were handling, analog audio. So we do that in digital world, since a lot of these plugins are actually programmed to, handle digital audio just like analog technology would. So how are you going to do that? Well, that gain staging is done by leaving enough headroom for everything, first off. Second off is, let's say I have this effect right there, and let me select all of these channels again, bring them down a tad bit to, I think that was to 0. Yeah, that was the original volumes. So now I do have an input, and as you see, headroom into this plugin, which is on top of all of those channels. They all get routed into the group, go into this one. So I do have headroom so that I can decide how hard I'm going into the compressor. So that helps me, and I can, move this headroom and decide how hard the input is going to be into this. But it doesn't change the fact that maybe I drove this too hot into the actual compressor. And then after that, on the compressor, I'm going to try to always level off the output so that, when I bypass this compressor, I get the same volume. It's just the dynamics that change. It's just the effect I wanted to add that changes so that I can objectively judge. That's good. I like it. I didn't want to break this, what I actually made right there. Although we would get to that again, of course, applying compression to group tracks, to individual tracks, all of those processes. One thing to get out of this is that headroom space where you're leaving just enough of the digital audio resolution for the peaks and the transients of the sounds to go through, plus for your master track not to clip once everything's at 0. So once I played the mix of my entire song, so you see, with that, I am satisfied. Now, I could always, on my master track, put in a plugin like, let's say, this utility, and pull this gain knob down, and that would be just it. I would get the same the same result as if all of these were feeding a bit, less loud. So I could always place that gain right there in front, since the internal resolution is much higher than what we have, meaning that anything clipping right there does not mean that it's clipping. It's just exceeding the zero mark right there, but the internal resolution of the actual software allows for that. So I could do that too, but I think it's a bad practice. And people usually say whatever sounds good, is good, and you should do that. Well, you should do that, no problem. But I think you can get the same result just like this and just like that. So, doing this on the output, before any of the plugins coming next on the master track or on the groups or whatever, you can always do this. But I think it's a better practice if you actually train yourself and learn to take care of all your levels as you're working the mix.